California has had the most expensive gasoline in the country. And now lawmakers are warning that prices could go even higher very soon.
That is the dire prediction for all California drivers tonight. It's because two of California's largest refineries are about to close, and they produce almost 20% of all the gas we use daily.
Phillips 66 is entering the process of shutting down its Los Angeles area refinery this week. When that happens, California will lose about 139,000 barrels per day of refining capacity, a significant figure for a state that isn't easily able to quickly replenish supplies from elsewhere. And this is no longer an internal company matter. This is a market signal. California was once confident that businesses must adapt to the rules of the game. But this time, the rules of the game seem to be backfiring. Phillips 66 is not a capital-weak business or a small name that will be eliminated. This is a corporation that operates strategic energy assets, impacting jobs, local taxes, and the supply chain of America's largest economy. When a name like that chooses to withdraw, the message sent to the market is very clear. The cost of compliance, policy risks, and uncertainty in California have exceeded the threshold that businesses are willing to endure. If Phillips 66 can leave today, who will be the next name tomorrow? And more importantly, is California pushing its economic pillars out of state boundaries? In today's video, we'll break down why this decision puts the California government under real pressure, and the price the state could pay in the upcoming year of 2026. California is a place where gas prices can become hot news in just one morning. And this time, the cause wasn't war or a major storm. It was a closing door right in Los Angeles. For many years, California has been among the states with the highest gasoline prices in the US. Whenever supply is tight, prices react immediately and strongly. In that context, Phillips 66 announced it would cease operations at its Los Angeles refinery in Q4 in 2025. The closure process is being implemented step by step. The plant is located in Wilmington, with a capacity of approximately 139,000 barrels per day, a significant portion of the Southern California market's supply. Reuters reports that production here includes approximately 85,000 barrels per day of gasoline and 65,000 barrels per day of diesel and aviation fuel. This means the impact extends not only to private vehicles, but also to freight transport and flight costs. The biggest problem isn't about losing a factory. It lies in the system losing elasticity. When a major link disappears, just a small disruption elsewhere, maintenance, an explosion, shipping delays, can cause prices to jump in a few days. The impact is even more pronounced because California uses its own CARB blend fuel standard. This makes it more difficult and slower to compensate for the power shortage from other states compared to many other places. You can't just pull gasoline from somewhere else and pump it into the station immediately, because it has to meet standards and be in the correct supply chain. According to some reports, the Phillips 66 Wilmington Carson complex once produced approximately 1.3 billion gallons of gasoline annually. That's equivalent to enough fuel to keep millions of work trips, grocery runs, and school runs running smoothly. Meanwhile, California currently imports about 1.1 billion gallons per year, which is equivalent to about 8% of its total supply. If Phillips 66 closes, the import dependency rate could increase to around 17%. And replacement isn't just about buying more gasoline. The state needs supply contracts, port, warehouse, transportation capacity, and most importantly, the right standard of fuel. The factor that makes everything urgent is time. Importing by ship can take several weeks to over a month, while life and logistics cannot pause to wait for the system to adapt. It's that very lag that makes volatility a risk gap that's difficult to fill. So it's not hard to understand why consumers are starting to doubt that they are paying the price right now, while the long-term benefits are still far off. A California-based delivery driver wrote, "Is this how the state is helping the poor? Taxing and regulating the things we need to survive until they become too expensive or disappear. If a major supply disappears, will California have enough time and capacity to replace it without turning gas prices into a gamble? And if a state wants to lead the energy transition, are people willing to tolerate volatility as an invisible tax during the transition phase?" And to understand why Phillips 66 can leave even when demand remains high, we must look at the next layer of causes: cost, regulation, and investment risk. A business rarely leaves because of impulsive feelings like, "I don't like it there." They left when the future became an unsolvable equation, and each year they stayed was like adding more money to uncertainty. For Phillips 66, the decision to close the refinery is not just an isolated event, but is set against the backdrop of energy corporations reassessing whether to remain permanently anchored in California. Not just Phillips 66. Valero also sent notice to the California Energy Commission about the potential for idling, restructuring, ceasing operations at Benicia before the end of April 2026, a signal that a wave of partial withdrawals is forming. Reuters noted that Valero recorded a $1.1 billion USD impairment pre-tax related to operations in California. For the market, impairment is not a political slogan. It's the way businesses are saying assets here are no longer valued as before because costs and risks have been added directly to the future. One of the most obvious pressures is the cost of compliance. Refineries in California must meet multiple layers of environmental, reporting, and safety standards. Each upgrade is not only expensive, but also time-consuming to permit. But what bothers businesses even more than the cost is policy uncertainty. If the state's long-term goal is to reduce fossil fuels, the refinery will always be in a questionable state. And when the industry's future is in question, long-term investment becomes a gamble. Meanwhile, the state government is in an extremely tense position. On the one hand, it wants to tighten oversight of the oil industry to protect consumers. On the other hand, it still needs the oil refining system to operate strongly enough to avoid supply shocks and price fluctuations. Newsom signed SB X12 into law to increase oversight, combat gas price gouging, and enhance regulation of the fuel market. Many people support this law because it shows that the state is trying to side with consumers. But for businesses, such moves are often interpreted differently. Policy risks increase, future profits become more unpredictable, and the risk of being drawn into political disputes is higher. Pressure also comes from the community and the media. The refining industry is easily scrutinized for environmental and health concerns. A single safety incident or pollution event can result in fines, media pressure, and social backlash for the company. Therefore, many companies choose a controlled retreat strategy, reducing investment capital, closing or scaling down operations in stages, and then shifting to a more stable environment. If California wants to punish high gas prices, while also needing refineries to exist to maintain supply, is the state getting caught in a policy trap? And when businesses retreat due to uncertainty, who will society blame? The businesses, the government, or a structure that is no longer suitable for the transition phase? California on the map is part of the United States. But in the fuel market, it operates like an island, isolated, sensitive, and vulnerable. When things are stable, no one notices. But just one supply disruption and people will realize gasoline in California can't be called in from elsewhere as quickly as in many other states. Reuters noted that in May 2025, California had to increase fuel imports by approximately 279,000 barrels per day, the highest level in 4 years, due to outages at major refineries. Meaning, when a few refineries malfunction, the state immediately has to rely on external sources to support the market. And this is how a system begins to become dependent. It's noteworthy that this fuel line doesn't come from nearby sources. Reuters reports that approximately 70% of imports come from South Korea and other Asian countries, a near-fixed supply relationship whenever the West Coast experiences shortages. Even Reuters noted unusual import routes such as the Bahamas at 38,000 barrels per day and India at 39,000 barrels per day. When domestic prices are high enough, the market will find every detour, and the cost of that detour will ultimately end up back at the gas station. When in-state supply decreases, the price is determined by marginal supply, the final compensating source. If the compensating source is imports, the price will be more sensitive to shipping schedules, freight costs, port capacity, storage facilities, and even international supply chain risks. In other words, gas prices began to depend on things that people could not control and sometimes could not even predict. The EIA warns that the refinery closure in California increases the risk of higher prices not only for California, but also for the entire West Coast region, as states like Arizona and Nevada also rely on regional supplies. When a fuel island falters, shockwaves often spread beyond state borders. To reduce the risk of price spikes, California passed legislation empowering the state's energy agency to set minimum inventory levels, ABX 2.1, signed on October 14, 2024. When the government has to intervene with a minimum inventory, it shows that the market no longer has enough safety buffer. And now, the question is not just how much will prices increase, but becomes a question of control. Will California's vital price rhythm be in the hands of Sacramento, or will it be at the mercy of international import market fluctuations? If imports become the main source of compensation, are people paying the price with long-term dependence? Can a state maintain energy security when it increasingly relies on international transportation routes? And when the offset source is out of state, what people will feel most clearly won't just be high prices, but prices that fluctuate wildly and unpredictably, like a thermometer jumping erratically every time the system vibrates slightly. If high prices are a burden, then price volatility is a form of psychological instability. It makes it impossible for people to plan. And that's what Californians are most tired of. Not just expensive, but also unpredictable. Reuters noted at the time of the article that the average retail price in California was about $4.68 gallon, while the national average was about $3.12 gallon. This gap isn't just about money, it's the feeling that California is operating in a rigged market, where every ripple in supply hits the cost of living directly. When refinery capacity decreases and imports increase, prices become more sensitive to short-term disruptions. Outages, delayed ship schedules, storage limitations, or increased premiums due to fuel needing to meet specific standards. A small glitch in a seemingly distant link can cause people to see a different number on the gas station price board the very next day. The EIA analyzes that closures increase the risk of higher prices on the West Coast because the regional market is relatively isolated compared to major US refining hubs. In an isolated market, every small fluctuation can trigger a large reaction. And that's why in California, gas prices don't just increase, but increase in a quantum leap kind of way. The California Energy Commission, in its fuel reports, often emphasizes that price spikes are a structural issue, not solely due to the price of crude oil. This means that even if oil prices don't rise sharply, the market can still fluctuate due to internal factors, inventories, logistics, outages, and increasing import dependence. The consequences don't stop at the gas station. Strong fluctuations make the cost of living difficult to predict, especially for those with fixed incomes or who need to travel frequently. You can bear the high price if it's stable, but when it jumps up and down, it's like an unannounced tax. It just appears and disappears, making people feel out of control. And when prices fluctuate, public trust often decreases faster than the price of gasoline increases. Political debate erupted because people needed a simple explanation for a very complex issue. That's when emotions begin to outweigh the facts, and a society gets caught in a spiral of blame, even though the cause sometimes lies in the supply structure. Are people more afraid of high prices, or are they more afraid of the feeling of not knowing what tomorrow will bring? If volatility becomes the norm, how much will trust in the governance system be eroded? And when gasoline fluctuates, diesel and jet fuel are often affected as well. Then the impact is no longer limited to gas stations, but spreads to transportation, supermarkets, and airports. If gasoline is the story of the personal car, then diesel is the story of the entire economy. When diesel prices go up, they don't stay at the pump. It creeps into every bill, from groceries in the supermarket, building materials on construction sites, to delivery fees right at your doorstep. That's why fuel volatility doesn't just cost people money. It makes them feel like everything is getting heavier at the same time. With aviation fuel, jet fuel, the impact often appears in a way that few people notice at first. When supply is tight or premiums increase, the operating costs of the aviation industry will be pushed up. And finally, those changes could be reflected in ticket prices, service fees, and the cost of air cargo transportation. Consumers may not be able to name the cause, but they will clearly feel it when everything is more expensive without knowing why. This shock also comes with another layer of impact: labour. When a refinery closes or downsizes, the damage isn't just the direct loss of jobs. It's also a decline in the entire surrounding ecosystem: contractors, technical services, transportation, maintenance. A community can lose stable jobs that have supported many families for decades. And this is where the story touches something deeper than money: health and safety. SF Gate once reported on the fire at Valero Benicia, which led to a shelter-in-place order, 2025, reminding residents that oil refineries are not just about capacity and output. It's a physical presence, and sometimes a constant worry. The SF Chronicle also noted that Benicia once had a record fine related to illegal toxic emissions, showing that the conflict between environmental protection and job preservation is not a theoretical debate. It's something people have to live with. Therefore, decisions to close or keep the refinery often create a sense of impasse. Closing causes worry about rising prices, job losses, and supply chain disruptions. Keeping it poses environmental and health risks. It's a stalemate where neither side can win completely, and neither side can walk away. As costs spread and the story becomes complex, people often have a very human reaction. They conclude that everything is getting worse at the same time, and feelings of anger translate into a need to find someone to blame. That's when headlines like "Governor Panics" started to erupt, because the public always wants a clear point of accountability, even when the issue is essentially a series of overlapping causes. When the environment, jobs, and fuel prices collide, who is forced to choose between two worries? Will a society accept health risks to keep prices low, or accept high prices to reduce risks? And as the impact spreads to daily life, the controversy will almost certainly be drawn into politics. That's when the governor and lawmakers will face the greatest pressure. When gas prices and the cost of living become a constant obsession, politics cannot remain on the sidelines. People may not closely follow energy reports, but they do watch the gas station price boards like a vital news bulletin. And when those numbers jumped, they needed an explanation, someone to blame, and a sense that the system was still in control. In that context, Newsom signed SB X12, June 2023, into law to increase market oversight, combat gas price gouging, and grant regulators additional authority to address unusual fluctuations. For many, this is a message that the state is trying to side with consumers, especially since California is constantly mentioned as a place with high gas prices and prone to price spikes. But politics rarely operates according to technical logic. AP reported in 2025 that a senior leader at the California Energy Commission had recommended pausing the plan to penalize excess oil profits because the definition and enforcement were unclear. To the public, this is easily understood in a simple way. Promise punishment but haven't delivered, while prices remain high. And when public expectations outpace the speed of policy implementation, a trust gap begins to emerge. When policy tools are debated for feasibility, pressure shifts to technical measures like minimum inventory, ABX 2.1. But technical solutions often don't relieve public sentiment. People want to see results immediately, while the energy system changes month by month and year by year. It was this lack of synchronization that made arguments easy to erupt. One side said there needs to be time, while the other said we can't wait. If closures continue and imports increase significantly, California could enter a new state. Import dependence would no longer be a situation, but would become a model. At that point, all the debates of today would not only revolve around the price of gasoline, but around the question, how autonomous is this state really? To answer, we need to look at the state energy agency's official forecast for import dependence in the near future. And that's where the long-term picture becomes clearest. In the end, this story isn't just about Phillips 66 or a few refineries closing. It's a question about the direction of America's most populous state. Will California become largely self-sufficient in its fuel supply? Or will it gradually live in a new model where fuel comes from outside as an essential import? The California Energy Commission, in a letter to the governor dated June 27, 2025, warned that fuel imports could increase to 25 to 35% of statewide demand by the summer of 2026 and could reach 50% in Northern California after closures. This is not just a technical figure, it's a structural shift. From imports being the compensatory part when the market falters, to imports becoming a fundamental part of the supply. If imports reach that level, fuel prices in California will be more affected by international markets, transportation fluctuations, and supply chain disruption risks. In other words, the factors that determine the price of gasoline are no longer entirely in the state's hands. It lies in ship schedules, shipping fees, port capacity, and even fluctuations that Californians have no right to vote to change. The importing state model also reduces the ability to control volatility through domestic supply. As the state's oil refining capacity weakens, the government is left with only administrative tools: minimum inventories, data transparency, emergency coordination, and market intervention measures. These tools can provide short-term relief, but they cannot replace the most important thing: a system with enough cushion to withstand shocks when events occur. EIA also emphasized that closures would not only affect California, but could also spread to neighboring states that rely on West Coast supplies. That means energy instability in California isn't just California's problem. It could become a regional story, and eventually a national one. The biggest debate is therefore no longer about whether to switch, but about the speed. If gasoline demand decreases slower than the rate of refinery closures, the gap will be filled by imports. And when the gap is filled by imports, dependence will increase during the transition period itself, a period when people are already weary of the cost of living. The main policy options are often put on the table in three directions. One is to maintain a minimum level of capacity in the state to reduce volatility. Second, increase import capacity, ports, warehouses, distribution, to reduce the risk of disruption. And thirdly, accelerate the energy transition, but this must be accompanied by investment in electricity infrastructure and solutions to reduce the cost of living, so that people don't feel they're bearing the brunt of a future that is still far off. Can California design a less disruptive transition for daily life, so that the future is not just a slogan, but a livable rhythm of life? California is not only facing high gas prices. California is facing something more troubling, an increasingly volatile fuel system. When refineries close faster than they can be replaced, imports are no longer a relief, but are gradually becoming a foundation. And when fuel becomes an import, what changes isn't just the price, but the feeling of control over daily life. If you find this video helpful in understanding what's happening, please hit the like button so I know you want more of this type of analysis. Share the video with relatives or friends living in California or West Coast states, because this isn't a far-fetched story. And don't forget to subscribe to follow the next videos about economics, policy, and the changes directly impacting the lives of American citizens. This video analyzes public information and provides commentary from a journalistic perspective. All data is sourced from official news sources, agencies, at the time of production, and is subject to change based on actual developments. The content is not financial, legal, or investment advice and does not represent any agency or organization.